So welcome everyone. Happy New Year. It's so great to have everybody back. I'm Janine Kelly and I'm here with the Executive Director of SpedNet, Eve Kessler, and we're thrilled to also have Dr. Nancy Schwartz with us here tonight. She will be talking about basic inferring of information, the importance of reading, the importance for reading and for life. This webinar is presented by SpedNet in partnership with Wilton Public Schools and Newtown Sped PTA. Dr. Nancy Schwartz is the founder and director of the Communication Clinic of Connecticut, LLC, in Ridgefield, where she and her therapist have provided speech, language, and relatedness social skills services for over 30 years. Her expertise is in working with children with language problems, in particular, children on the autistic spectrum and/or with speech apraxia. Dr. Schwartz holds a PhD in speech and a master's in communicative disorders. She has been certified by the American Speech and Hearing Association and also in relationship development intervention. Dr. Schwartz has taught at multiple universities on both the undergraduate and graduate levels in California, Connecticut, and New York. She was the director of the Scottish Rite Institute for Childhood Aphasia in Los Angeles and works with families all over the world. Just full disclosure, my second son began working with Nancy and her team when he was almost 3 years old and then worked with them after that for many years. I was fortunate enough to witness firsthand the brilliant work that Dr. Schwartz and her team do, particularly on this very subject. And my son is now a junior in college. So I highly recommend that everyone not only pay attention, but share her wisdom far and wide. There's also a handout that was sent out with the webinar and will also be sent out again tomorrow. If you don't have it with you, that's fine. It will be attached to the video of this presentation. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please check out our website for topics of interest. There are many, and many webinars have been pre-recorded and rest on our website. Also on our website is our guide to special services, bringing knowledge to the table, how to be an effective advocate for your child. If you want to support our organization, please feel free to do so. You can donate to SpedNet. We're a nonprofit organization, and 100% of your donations go directly back to programming. Just a few ground rules before we get started. We're going to leave time for questions. You can begin to type them in at your leisure through the Q&A. Please try not to type them into the chat. It's much easier to follow the questions through the Q&A, so please do it there. And at various points during Nancy's presentation, we can stop her and ask your question. Otherwise, we'll just wait until the end and we'll be sure that it gets addressed then. Also be mindful that this presentation is being recorded. It's an open forum, and so we can't guarantee confidentiality. You may not want to reveal any private information in your questions. And lastly, any information provided in this presentation by Dr. Schwartz or Eve Kessler or myself is not intended to be legal or therapeutic advice. The information, content, and materials are for general purposes only. And with all of that being said, welcome, Nancy. We're so happy to have you, especially on this very important topic.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and a happy new year to everybody. And this is truly strange. I really prefer to be with people and to see reactions. And so if you do wind up with questions, and maybe you can even earmark it if it's something that you feel needs to be answered at just that moment. I do better with interaction. I'm an interactive person. But at any rate, I find this topic to be wonderful. I mean, one of the major things in my clinic is that we talk about the children becoming thinkers and the fact that they need to be participating in life to do that. And that thinking, if they're not thinkers, then they're really not participating. So there is a difference between a rote learner and a thinker. A rote learner has the ability to offer memorized content, while the other is a problem solver. Rote learning has its place, and often I wish I were a better rote learner than I am, but it also needs to be only one type of learning that the child does. And often rote learners can demonstrate very high scores on some types of tests and tasks. But what we really want to do is you want to have a combination between somebody who has strong rote learning skills and then somebody else who is a thinker. And I'll often tell that to parents, that our goal is not to eliminate the rote thinking, but to balance it out. Because when you have both, as I said, you have somebody who is a really good thinker. Inferring and problem solving really starts very early on. There was a study done once where this was with an 18-month-old. And this man was up on a ladder and he was pinning things to posters or whatever up high. And suddenly he dropped something and the 18-month-old was there. The 18-month-old goes over, picks up and hands the item back to him. Okay. And then the guy went back to work and then he's working. And then suddenly he takes an item and throws it down with clear anger. That child didn't go and offer him the items that had fallen on the floor. They had inferred that adult did not want that piece of that material. So even at that age, they're thinking. On a very simplistic level, I remember watching two little 18-month-old or 2-year-old kids banging on a window in a building, and they're banging, and one of them takes off and is banging, and the other one looks and infers, oh, if I want to be with my friend, I have to go with him. Again, basic kind of inference, but happening at 2 years of age. I mean, it's crazy. We are thinkers. We are born to be thinkers, and it is a skill that we need to develop. Our children, kids on the autistic spectrum, often are rote learners to begin with because it's easier. They feel competent holding onto the same material and using that material in the same way because they're competent and they feel safe. And having changes is very threatening. But we tend to also, in our approach to autistic children, often facilitate further learning that is done through rote skills. A lot of the kids have strong skills in terms of learning numbers and letters, and we're pleased with that. It's one of that we see, wow, my child's so smart, he knows all the letters of the alphabet. And we're praising and we're pleased with it. And not that we shouldn't be, but it is a rote skill. And it's only one type of learning that the child has. The other thing is that the way we wind up approaching our kids is often through rote learning. We will approach the child and teach them routines, and often the routines are taught in a very fixed way. That means that they're learning one step, another step, but nobody is saying to them, okay, if there's no toothpaste, what do? They're not thinking about the problems that could arise. So the child will tend to learn those routines in a fixed way. Often in terms of even teaching labels, when we teach an object label, we teach it associated with one particular representation of that item, as opposed to a lot of them. So again, a lot of those same objects. So again, the child learns this, memorize, the shoe is a red shoe with a lace. Not a shoe is a red shoe with a lace, a brown shoe, a green shoe, a buckled shoe, a sneaker, a sandal. That expansion is not taught. We tend to teach our kids in a much more finite way. We also do a lot of teaching through questioning. Okay, so now the child is not initiating, we're questioning. They're responding, they wait to respond, they don't initiate, they're not thinking about what should I even question. They're just responders. And again, that means that they're more of rote thinkers than they are in terms of thinkers about life. The other part of it is that we often don't give our kids time to problem solve. What happens is that they're on a schedule. At home, they need to get out to go to school. In school, they go from one service to another service, back into the mainstream, often very fragmented schedules. They often have paras with them, people who are supporting them. Paras get bored, okay? And they have nothing to do other than to take care of the child. So if the child has a need, they're stepping in because they want to look good. They want the child to look like they're ready to have all their materials. Well, if you give the child time and say, oh, you don't have your materials, and then they have to go and figure out, it might be that the child winds up late to the class that they have to go to, or not prepared with the materials that they need. So it's risky for a paraprofessional to give the child time to think and to allow the child to experience that failure. The same way often as parents, we don't allow our children to experience the failure and then to have to figure it out. What am I supposed to do under these circumstances? So that we tend not to facilitate in a natural way that kind of thinking. And the problem is in school, the background information, the information about life that our kids often miss because they're not good observers. They don't learn by looking at the rest of life. They don't observe what others are doing. And because they're not observing as well as they should be in terms of what others are doing, they're not learning about natural consequences within life. So what winds up happening is they have a collection of memorized content, and they're not practicing inferring and thinking and problem solving. They're not observing in life and learning that incidental information that they need. And therefore, they're not thinking. And then we give them academic material. And what do we want? We want them to think about it, maybe. And when they're asked to assume that responsibility for thinking, they're coming to the situation without that practice. Kids, as I said, as young as 2 years of age, are kids who are, in fact, already thinking and inferring. I remember being in a preschool class and watching kids in recess, and one of the little girls was dragging her scarf. And the other little girl said to her in a polite way, "Oh, your scarf's getting dirty." And so she scooped it up and she very quickly, got it back around her neck so it wasn't dragging. Our kids, somebody would have stepped in and done that for them. They wouldn't have been given the time to solve that problem. So if they can't solve those kind of basic life problems, now you give them reading material, and now you're saying you need to infer information while you read. But they're not bringing the background information, and they're not bringing the experience of solving problems on a regular basis to that reading experience. So for instance, if a child is reading a little story about somebody scraping their knee and doesn't really understand the sequence of events that happens when you scrape your knee, and the fact that you wash the injury off, you give an ointment, you put Band-Aid on, they won't infer at the end, at another part in the story, that the character has a Band-Aid on, because they didn't have that knowledge to bring forward, to share, and to be able to think about it. You can't visualize the next step if you don't have the information. And even if you can visualize the next step, if you don't know that active inferring and you have not been given that responsibility on a daily basis, when you're asked to do it in terms of reading material, you're not going to have that skill to be able to do it. Okay, so what we need to be doing is we need to be starting with our kids in life to be able to infer information. We want to give them basic experiences and share with them. They need to learn how to infer information. And to do that, they need to be learning horizontally. So if somebody gets hurt and hurts an elbow, that example, that situation needs to be connected to when somebody else might have fallen and hurt their knee. And that might have to be connected when somebody else has stubbed their toe and cut their toe. All of those kinds of examples need to be pulled together so that the child has content to think about and to start linking up to make those kinds of connections. The child needs to learn how to infer information because it's connecting the dots that allow a child to problem solve in concrete situations, like if something spills or something gets dirty or a knee gets hurt, but also in social situations. understanding that milk is bad to drink because it smells bad. Okay, understanding that in a social situation, understanding that the teacher is angry, therefore it's not really a good time to ask about the special pass to the library. Our kids get in a lot of trouble for asking things at the wrong time, and they don't understand why, and it's difficult to explain it to them. It's also then inferring of information is also then needed for academic work. You're not going to understand that the harsh winter during the Revolutionary War negatively impacted the distance that George Washington's troops were able to follow. Because if you can't infer about the impact of cold weather on roads and such, you're not going to be able to draw the right conclusion. Or on a higher level, you're not going to understand the impact of climate change on all sorts of different aspects of life. So if you can't infer about life, when you get to the higher level, you're going to choose to memorize content just because you can't infer the information. So for those of you who have heard me speak and know that one of my magic bullets is declarative language, okay, one of the most basic ways that we can help our kids learn how to infer information is to be using declarative language. Declarative language is a language of experience sharing. It's where you talk to somebody, you tell them about something. What you don't do with declarative language is you don't ask questions to which you know the answer. So there's no reason in the world where you might say, as I hold up my water bottle and say, what color is this? Okay, that's a ridiculous question to ask. Okay, that's not declarative language. Giving kids commands, that's not declarative language. But giving children your feelings, telling children about the evidence that you saw. Oh, I know Dad read the newspaper. I see it's open on the counter. Giving them insight into your thought process, that's declarative language. And the most important part that you can use with declarative language is the ability to offer a statement from which the child then needs to infer information. So I'm going to give you some examples, and you're going to say, if you've never heard this before, you're going to say, oh, that's easy to do. It is not. It's hard to do. And you guys, I've given everybody a handout on declarative language. So please read through it. That was another talk. And I'm happy to do that talk again at some point if there are people who need it. But I do need to spotlight it in reference to declarative language for inferential thinking. So if I say to a child, oh no, the table's wet, and then I wait, and key point along with declarative language come for inferring information also comes extended processing time. So if I say, uh-oh, that table's wet, then I might stop and wait and look at it and look at the child. And then I'll say, I have all these books. I don't want to put those books on that table. The table's wet. And then I might wait. And if I don't get a response, then I might say, oh, there are paper towels over there. So I'm feeding the child information, but at no point do I turn around and say, you need to wipe the table, okay? Because once I do that, then I have assumed the responsibility for problem solving. I am taking away the child's right to learn how to infer information. So what I would like to do right now, I have one video that I want to share today. I don't know if any of you have seen it before, but this is a video of one of my guys who is now, he's 26 or whatever. He wasn't 26 in this video. And this is a video of him solving problems based on declarative language input. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay.
And we're going to actually have a lot of things from the patient. So, okay, we need to clean up some of the things. That's a good idea. We don't want to use a dirty knife. Okay. Go ahead, you take care of that. I'll take care of this.
Okay, so he just started cleaning up a little bit. And I told him that we were going to be doing a lot of things at that table. And he picked up the one item there that was dirty and he's taking it to the kitchen. So I never told him to take the knife to the kitchen. He inferred what he needed to do. Not only was Isaac a lot younger than he is in this video, then I was also a lot younger too. I don't know where we went. Okay.
No, otherwise, if I'm gonna look for something today. Okay, not today. I know we've done that on other days, but it's cold today. You just made me weak. All right.
Okay, so just to give you a little piece of information about that, I have always, Isaac tended to be a little rigid. So we would even do things with wiping hands. We have nothing else to wipe our hands on. What can we wipe our hands on? Wipe your hands on your clothes. It's okay. Your clothes will dry, you'll survive. But what I was trying to also do here with him is that sometimes we do that, sometimes we don't, okay? And that was what I was trying to convey, okay?
Here, and we're gonna cook. You and I and TJ, we're gonna cook some different kinds of pancakes today. Last time we made chocolate chip pancakes, but this time we're gonna make something else. So we're gonna have a lot of ingredients to put out on the table. Yeah, yeah. We're gonna have some milk and a pancake mix and eggs. I have a lot of things out on the table in here. Yeah, a whole lot, all piled up together.
So you can see I'm gradually adding more and more information. Okay, I told him that there's going to be a lot of materials that we're going to need, and I want him to figure out that that small table is just not going to work. But I'm layering the information, but I'm still not telling him what to do.
Okay, well, that's a good idea. You don't need a little chair, do you? You guys are big. Okay. That's gonna make the floor squeak. I hate that sound.
So that was just experience sharing because I want to talk to him about it and I'm giving him my feelings.
Measure almost near the carpet. Fine. So now I have 2 chairs and this little table. 2 chairs and this little tiny table. Oh, that's a good idea. Good. That gives me the shivers. Okay, so now we have nothing here. Now that would be a silly thing. Put the eggs down, it would break. Pretty funny.
But look how active Isaac is. He's running to go get the materials. He's figuring these problems out. Took him a while to figure out that we need a big table, but he did it. And it took him probably my saying, oh, this table is little, and actually stating that it was little, but he still figured out the problem.
Oh, I can hear you coming. Wow.
So I'm now letting him know, and we're going to talk about that next. I'm letting him know that I know things based on on the senses. And in this case, it's hearing.
You're pretty strong to bring that table by yourself. Oh, it's heavy when you're pushing down on it. It's heavy when we're pushing down. There we go. We can take that.
Okay, so that was just another declarative. I said he was pushing down on it as opposed to picking it up. So I said, it's heavy when you push down on it. I didn't tell him, pick it up. But I offered the declarative and he figured it out.
Chair's in the way. That chair's in the way too. Setting up the table. Uh-oh. That ring's not on, the legs not close. This ring isn't on the bottom, the legs might fall down. There we go. Right. 1, 2, 3, Allie. There is something.
Okay, I think we're going to stop here. I hope you were able to see the many examples of using declarative language. I think one of the most important pieces that you can get out of is that declarative language describes the situation. So it spotlights the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem for the child. Clearly, we want the child to be a thinker, and we want the child to be able to see the problems and solve the problems on their own. But they haven't had the experience, and they don't have the practice yet. So here we have commands, okay? Here we have independence. Declarative language is in between, okay? Declarative language acts as the facilitator or the spotlighter for problems that occur and that which the child needs to think about and to infer what to do. So declarative language can be practiced all day, every day, and I think, and should be, because not only does it have to do with this, but it also has to do with conversation. The more the child hears declarative language, the more likely they are to converse, but that's another topic. Okay, so the other part that I started showing you on the video was that need to teach the child how they know things, okay? Knowing, being able to understand things comes through the senses. I know that somebody ate lunch someplace because I see the crumbs. I know the dishwasher's on because I can hear it. I know that somebody ate used honey at the table because it feels sticky, okay? You go through the senses. Using the senses is how the child can collect information and also how the child can infer and think about your perspective. Because on a concrete level, if I am looking out the window and I see that there are cars, but you're looking out the door into the hallway and you see kids, okay, we are knowing different information. And you can't assume that I know what you know. I can only infer what you're thinking about if I say, oh, they're looking out the window, okay? They must be seeing X, Y, and Z. So I'm thinking about from their perspective, but the knowing what they know is based on their senses. What I know is based on my senses, okay? So perspective taking on a concrete level, or perspective taking starts on a concrete level through the senses. Development of knowledge starts on a concrete level through the senses. And that's something that we need to emphasize for the kids, and we need to begin to teach them. And we need to slow down our experiences with the kids and talk about this, okay? And give them your thoughts. Help them to realize that they know something because they're seeing it. They know something because they're feeling it, okay? That kind of information is really important. And it's one way for us to be teaching information to the kids. And then thinking about it, you can infer from what you see and come to a conclusion. You can infer from what you hear and come to a conclusion. And you can do that across the senses. We will, in the clinic, we'll do specific exercises tied to that. I might take a spoon and cover it up with tinfoil tinfoil and then take a ball and cover it up with tinfoil, and I'll say, where's the ball? And they'll show me which one is the ball, and I'll talk about it. You know that that's the ball because you can see the shape. I might put something in a bag and shake it, and one bag that has something in it and another bag that's empty. And then I'll say, oh, which bag has the candy in it? Right, you knew this one had the candy because you can hear it. Okay, let's check it out. Let's make sure. Open it up. Ah, it wasn't candy, it was marbles. And you know it was marbles because you can see the marbles. Okay, so connecting the senses. I'll often take flour, sugar, salt, and present it to the children and say, which is which? Okay, and they get the flour, okay, because they can see it looks different. Then we're down to sugar and salt. Which one is sugar? Which one is salt? And I'll always get, oh, that's the sugar. How do you know that? Well, I'm looking at it. But look at this one. They look the same. How do you know this is the sugar? Okay, all right, so let's figure this out. Then I'll hold it near the ears and I'll shake it. Do you know which one is the sugar? And I'll get, that one's the sugar. I said, no, listen, they both sound the same. They both sound the same. They're both grains. And I might take the sugar, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt, and put it on their hands and let them rub it. And again, I'll say, which one do you think it is the sugar? And again, they'll come up with a guess. And I said, you can't know that. And then eventually we get to tasting, okay? And that kind of experiment. We do the same thing with vinegar versus water. And that usually goes a little bit faster because they can tell sort of right away which one is the vinegar. But again, the knowing and the inferring of the information comes through the senses. I will, on another note, we talk about encouraging the child to be a next step thinker and encouraging the child to think about what's going to happen next. Now we begin to see that that really takes experience and exposure in a horizontal way, seeing things like different ways to make things dirty, different ways to make things wet, getting the idea that there are different ways that that can happen. And so we will talk about instances where they might need to predict. So let's say we have the situation where the floor is dirty and the child has to figure out why, okay? So that was the problem. But now we'll take a situation where we'll have a dog with muddy paws and let the child predict that the floor is going to get dirty because the dog has muddy paws. And then we'll talk about, okay, so now you know that a dog with muddy paws will make the floor dirty. Let's go outside, get your feet muddy. Okay, let's go in. What's going to happen? And connect the example with the dog and connect it to their own shoes and understanding that there are different ways to come to the same conclusion. We've done different things in the clinic where we will create a mess on the floor and then we'll sit back and we'll watch and we'll ask the child to predict, what do you think is going to happen next? What's the next step? And we'll watch and we'll say, and they'll predict, oh, the lady's going to come in and she's going to clean it. And the next thing that happens is the lady comes in and steps over it. Oh no, she stepped over it. Why? Oh, look, she's in a hurry. She didn't have time to clean it. Oh, but here comes Nancy. Nancy's the director of the clinic. All right. Uh-oh, it's a mess. What do you think she's going to do? Nancy's cleaned it because she's responsible for it. So understanding that you can predict, but predicting with flexibility, and there can be different outcomes, but also understanding that so one condition can result in different outcomes. Different conditions might result in the same outcome, giving the child that opportunity to look at the connection between what happens and what happens next. In the clinic, we talk about helping the child to become a next step thinker, okay? So that he is thinking about the next step. To do that, the child has to have experiences, life experiences, and the expectation that they want somebody who does need to think about the next step. I don't know at this point, before I go into the next section, are there any specific questions that have come up?
Nancy, no, not yet.
Okay, that's fine.
Not yet.
Okay, good enough. All right, so now we might want to think about how can we make it even more concrete to teach these kids how to infer information. And one of the ways that I came up with doing that is teaching the child to understand that if you add one piece of information, number one, with another piece of information, that's number two, what you can get is a number three. So it comes to, by combining the first two, you get a conclusion. So for instance, if you combine a candle and you combine it with the cake, you get a birthday, okay? However, if you combine a candle with a flashlight, what do you get? Blackout, okay? So that combining different information, pieces of information in different ways come out, you get different results, okay? But it's that idea for our kids, for them to understand that they actively need to put information together. So when we use declarative language and expose the kids to inferring information that way, it's sort of a life experience. What I'm talking about now are more formal ways that we can actually teach the child that act of inferring information, the idea that you actively need to think, take one piece of information, add a different piece of information, and you can come up with a third piece of information. That's a very different kind of experience than just incidentally inferring what you need to do. And in fact, after the child has experiences with inferring information with declarative language, we'll often go back to the information that they inferred about and now make it more concrete. So you saw that the table was wet and there was a paper towel and you figured out that you needed to wipe the table, okay? Or you saw that the juice spilled and that created a wet table. And now we're taking that kind of information and making it more concrete so it can be used more for academic purposes and on a more metacognitive kind of level. So to start, we'll do multiple examples of teaching the child different basic associations. So things like putting out peanut butter and jelly, okay? What do you think's you're gonna get at the end of that, okay? A sandwich. Multiple seats and a movie. What do you have? You have a movie theater. Slide in a swing. What do you have? You have a playground. So helping them. Key to all this, though, is interesting, is that if the child doesn't know about playgrounds, they're not going to be able to come to the conclusion. If the child doesn't know about birthdays, they're not going to be able to infer information. What makes me absolutely crazy is when kids are given reading passages. I had one young man who was a very indoor kind of guy. And when I was observing, he was reading a passage about camping. He had never gone camping. He didn't know anything about camping. And yes, they presented some of the information in the passage, but he couldn't infer what was going to happen in the story because he had no experience camping. You cannot infer information if you don't have some information for it to be a base for. Sure, when you're a better reader and you've had experience, you might be able to do it, but when you're learning how to infer information, you have to, in order to connect ideas, you have to have some concrete experience with that kind of information. So what I wound up doing was thinking about all different ways that we can ask the child to learn this basic equation for inferring information. So pictures about locations. So we're going to infer what the location is. So we have a slide and a swing, playground. And what we'll do on a basic level is I'll put out a picture of a playground. I'll put out a picture of a store and maybe a picture of ice skating. And then say, okay, if it's a slide and a swing, what's the location? And then they'll choose the correct picture. What I might do alternatively is prior to asking the question, I might show a little video of a playground and a little video of a beach. And we'll talk about what's going on in the beach. We'll talk about what's going on in the playground. And then I'll say, okay, so now if you saw an umbrella and a blanket and a pail, where do you think you are? Right, you're at a beach. Let's go check. And we'll go back to the video or go back to the picture and say, yep. And you pulled the information. You had the separate pieces of information. You had the pail, you had the shovel. Okay, you had the umbrella. You pulled that together and you came up with beach. So you have to make sure that the child has the information. But when they do have the information, that's when you want them to pull the information together. And what we'll also do is after the child has inferred that they're at the beach, then I'll say, okay, let's think about all the other things you might see at the beach. So now we're building and making that experience that much richer and talking about. So now I'll say to them, okay, we listed all these different things. So now if I say to you, I see sand and a shell, where are we? At the beach, right? If I say to you, oh, listen to this one. If I say to you, sand and a slide, where do you think we are? Right, we're at the playground, because the playground can have a sandbox. So being able to pull that information, it's 1 + 2 = 3, or it could be more information and it still comes out to a different conclusion. We did that in terms of, and this is all in one of your handouts, the handout about making connections. So if you can do inferring to connect ideas to figure out who somebody is. Okay, so we have something like a stethoscope and a tongue depressor. Who's that going to be? Okay, or a hose and a helmet. Who's that going to be? Or a badge and a handcuff. So again, taking the tools of the trade and making that kind of association, but bothering to teach how to infer information, both in terms of location and in terms of who's doing what. Okay, so again, I'll do the same thing, where now we'll look at a pic. I might have, before we started, looked at a little videos about a doctor, a fireman, a farmer, whatever. I might have pictures out. It depends on the level that the child is at. I might brainstorm with the child first and say, let's list all that we can think about a doctor, what we can think about a fireman, and then give them the cue and ask them to, if we have this one and this one, who are we talking about? Okay, it's just that exposure of pulling things together. Doing the same thing in reference to what is somebody doing. Okay, so again, I'll review the idea of the equation. 1 + 2 is going to equal 3. So let's say we have paint and a brush. What's somebody going to be doing? If we have broom and a dustpan, what's somebody going to be doing? Okay, so 1 + 2 = 3. And then again, what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll talk about each one of these associations and we'll build it out. Okay, if you're going to paint, what else do you need if you're painting? Okay, and it's going to be different if you're painting on a piece of paper or if you're painting a wall. So you want to be able to get them to be able to figure out other associated materials. Okay. Another concept that we do within this is connecting ideas to figure out a whole. Okay, so in this case, I might have a picture, 2 pictures, and then I'll bring out parts. So I'll bring out, I don't know, it probably will be pictures in this case, because I didn't necessarily break apart objects, but I might bring out a picture of a bike wheel and handlebars and pedals and say, okay, what's the whole? What if you put these together, what are we going to get? Might bring out a windshield and a steering wheel. What are we going to get? Okay, because again, that understanding the parts lead to a whole is really an inference. Okay, it's not, it is, we find it on lots of tests, but lots of our kids are unable to draw that inference to be able to really come to the conclusion that we want. Another one that's interesting is connecting ideas to figure out what caused a condition. So you have a wet table, okay? And we're figuring out, now we're going the other way. So if we have a wet table, what are the conditions? What could have caused it? Or we could do it the other way, okay? We have a child with a big bottle, okay? And they're gonna have to pour the liquid from this big bottle into this little cup. What might be the resulting condition, okay? What might happen? We have a rain and we have a dog digging. What's gonna happen? We might wind up with a muddy floor. We have a child eating and a very large bag of candy. What might be the result? A stomach ache. We have a man riding a bike and a very steep hill. What might be the result? A very tired man, okay? So, and then we'll flip it, okay, and say, okay, you have a stomach ache. What might have caused that? So you want to go both ways in terms of drawing the inference. It's a little bit different under these conditions. But this also is leading to the child being a next step thinker. So if you have different conditions, this and this, what could happen? That's pushing the child to be a next step thinker, okay? I'll sometimes have my kids stand outside of the kitchen and watch in the kitchen and say, okay, and I'll yell to somebody in the kitchen, freeze, and say to the kid who's watching, what do you think he's gonna do next? And if he says whatever it is, and I'll talk about, yes, you knew that. You knew that he was going to put the pan on the stove because you saw that he took out the butter and you saw that he took out an egg, etc. So I'll use, we'll use people, and it's harder for the kids to actually use the people because now there are other distractions. Now they have to figure out what they have to look at, what they have to look for. But it's so important that they're a next step thinker. On a very basic level, think about it this way. If you're walking into the kitchen and there's somebody else there and you see them pick up a hot pan off the stove and the sink's over here, if our kid doesn't have a next step thought about this guy is turning to put that hot pan into the sink, he might wind up getting burnt. Okay, or the kid who's holding the hot pan doesn't anticipate that the kids who are about to walk into the room is going to cross his path. He might wind up burning and bumping into that kid who's walking through. So being a next step thinker and inferring what's going to happen next is not just important for reading. It is, but it's not just important for answering questions, which it is, but it's also important for just manipulating and maneuvering through life. Okay, so the other, a more difficult level is connecting it to ideas and how they might influence each other. So if you have a playground and you know about what it's like when it's raining outside, okay, then you can infer what it's going to be like at a playground when it's raining. Okay, you can infer that things are going to be wet and you can't go down the slide. You can infer that even the swing's going to get wet. But now we're connecting two ideas to come up with a third. Think about what it's like at a beach and the rain, or think about what it's like in a town when it's snowing. What are the roads going to look like? Being able to infer the conditions and that it's going to be slippery. Or think about what's going to be going on in a school on a holiday and being able to infer that the school's going to be empty. So what we're using is the information and drawing it together. On one last level that we do with this is using additional evidence to support a conclusion. So you see somebody who has the hair is wet, okay? What caused that? If the hair's wet and the clothes are wet, chances are they got caught in the rain. If the hair's wet, but they have a towel wrapped around them, chances are they took a shower, okay? So being able to draw two different kinds of conclusions based on an integration of information. Okay, it's kind of fun. It's fun teaching it. It's fun thinking about what to teach, but it's also fun if you have the child in life. Okay, dad's going to be stepping out of the shower. Okay, he's going to be walking out into the hallway. Predict what's dad going to look like when he comes out. Okay, that kind of prediction can happen in life all the time, and it's a great thing for us to be teaching our kids. So what we do, and what I completely advocate for, is getting your kids involved in life. I gave another handout about all the things that kids can learn by participating in chores and activities of daily living. They learn how to predict. They learn how to infer. They learn how to solve problems. They learn how to be flexible. It's a wonderful venue for teaching, and don't throw it away. You know, even if you have to pay them to participate in chores, it's well worth it, because then they are learning, and they learn things like dad does this chore one way and mom does it this way, and I like to do it this way. Or they learn that a brush is better to use than a sponge. And guess what? Then their sensory issues go away also, because now they're putting up with the sensory issue to scrub things down, and they can deal with the way it feels. So involve them in life. It's really important. Okay. So
Nancy,
yes.
before you turn to the next topic, if you are, there's a question. Is it a good time?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question is, where might we see IEP goals that address this? And what might be an example of working on this with an older student, e.g. high school?
So it really depends on the older student. Okay. So if it's a high schooler who's in typical classes, but having trouble having difficulty, we might write within reading on the idea of inferring information. If it's one of my IEP suggestions, there's a whole section this long about problem solving. We need to, you can insert problem solving and inferring information on different levels. So you can put it into social skills, okay? And so social skills learning will, the child will identify the problem within a social situation involving 2 or 3 other peers, you know, something along those lines. You could put it into reading. The child will predict what the character will do next. Okay, so that's one way. Or the child will identify the problem within the passage and state possible solutions. And I like that, possible solutions with the plural, so that it's not that fixed, you know, I'll go back to the text and find out exactly what was said, and it's only one response. So it can be embedded into academics, it can be embedded into the social skills. But if it's a younger child, I strongly advocate for a functional science section where the child learns about wholes and learns about absorption and learns to think about what they need to do to solve concrete life problems. I have kids, I have one girl who I work with, and she's in middle school now, and she's doing great with all the reading and whatever. Take her back into life and ask her to think of 3 different ways that she could clean that table, and she's dead in the water. She doesn't know what to do. So one skill doesn't necessarily mean you have the other skill. You know, we for typical people, we sometimes say, oh, he has no common sense, meaning give him a concrete problem. He does great in the banking world, but give him a concrete problem and he doesn't know his left foot from his right. So we need to make sure that we address that inferring of information with the academics, but also in life at the same time. Okay.
There are a lot of other questions, but I'm going to let you finish, and then we'll ask.
Let me finish. I'll finish.
Yeah.
Quickly, and then, so to sum up, sort of, to teach the ability to infer clearly, the first thing I'm going to say is declarative language. Another thing that I'm going to say is have the child participate in life. Use visual referencing, where you look and guide the child to look at what you're looking at, to push them to infer what you're thinking about and to collect information. So if you, let's say, come to a plate on the table of, and you could say, oh, I know that so-and-so is eating, and you can look and visually reference the physical cues so the child learns to think about what they're doing, think about their surroundings and infer information. It's important to facilitate flexible thinking for both predictions and problem solving. We need to use the senses to discern evidence from which to draw conclusions. And more importantly, we need to connect different experiences so the kids can see the commonalities between them. So just to give you an example about what I've done in the clinic with reading with some of my kids is we make sure they have the underpinnings. Again, you can't understand what you read if you don't know, if you can't think about that material. So for example, there's one young man who I'm going to read a story to you. But before we read the story, we gave him lots of experiences about holes. We had actually done a whole unit about holes. But so he knew that if there's a hole, something falls through it. He knew that if there are different size holes and you put in a big item and it's a little hole, it won't fall through. But right before I read him the story, we did a little exercise where, in fact, we fooled around with bags with holes in different size items. And then I read the story. So one day a girl was walking home. She had just come home from the bakery and was very excited to go home and share her cookies with her brother. She was eating one and it was delicious. When she got home, her brother was mad because she had not saved any cookies for him. The girl said she had, but when she looked in the bag, there were no cookies left. Why do you think there weren't any cookies? What do you think happened? And what do you think she should do? So again, thinking about the fact that there could have been a hole in the bag. But in order to answer these questions, not only did I write a story for him that was based on a unit of study, holes, but I refreshed that memory for him about holes and the impact of holes in a bag just before reading the story. So then he could infer what would happen. So that's on a concrete level, that's the level of teaching a child how to infer information. Okay, so now I'm open for any questions you want.
Excellent. So this is an interesting question because so much of what you talk about today, Nancy, can be applied to all kids. It's so important for all kids to develop these problem solving skills, right? Right. And this question is, how much of an executive function delay is really an inferencing delay? If you need to make a school project plan, you need to visualize that plan and for each step, etc.
I totally agree that weak executive function skills can come into play. And in fact, one of the things we do when we're teaching executive function is help the kids to visualize the end product and then talk about on a concrete level, what are the steps to get there? So on a precursor level to that, we work on both divergent thinking, where what are all the different tools that we can use in order to solve this problem, but also convergent in terms of saying, okay, if we want this product, okay, at the end, what do we have to bring together to make this product? What do you think somebody used? And that's the same thing as the executive function. That idea that if you want this end product and you visualize it, then you have to break out the steps and understand that this step leads to this step, leads to that step. So it's all tied together. And unfortunately, our kids wind up with looking, and to some extent, like they have executive function difficulties, when in fact, what it might be is that they can't infer what needs to be done. But then that's executive function difficulty. So it's a chicken and the egg kind of question.
And along the same lines, a lot of students who have trouble paying attention will have some of these issues, right, with problem solving and inferencing. And the next question is, how do you help children who are frequently internally distracted infer and pick up on important clues?
Okay, so one of the things is the importance of shifting the responsibility to the child, okay, and giving them time to do it. So again, that use of the declarative language and pairing it with time and layering it. So as you saw that I did with Isaac, that ability to layer and say, okay, not just when I was trying to get him to move that table, he was fooling around. He was sort of, in some ways, distracted by things. But because I layered the declarative language, we built and kept his focus. So that's one piece of it. The other part of it is teaching the kids to use their eyes to think and to follow visual referencing also helps the child to be much less distracted. So answering a question, a yes/no questions using your face and your head instead of using words, the child has to refocus and look at you. So it's a combination of the child understanding that it is their responsibility, that you're not going to do it. You're spotlighting and supporting the problem solving and inferring of information with the declaratives, and also keeping the child's visual attention, because that keeps their attention in general. And to keep that, you can, saying it's over there. Now they had to have been looking at you. So that helps.
No other questions yet, but I just want to give everyone a little time in case they're typing. And so much of what you talk about, I think the most important thing that was hardest for me as a parent was time, giving them the time, right? That's just so hard to build into our everyday crazy lives, but just giving them that time to figure it out, to find the solution, to infer, right? It's just so hard at home and in the classroom, but it's the most important thing, I think.
Right. And it's so hard in the classroom because the other kids have already moved on. Or if not, either the para has answered for the child, if there is a para, or another child has answered for the child, and that happens a lot as well. And it's not fair because our kids need that experience, inferring the information and feeling good about it. And when they actually infer the information, they're going to keep the information themselves, as opposed to just hearing it and letting it go out the other ear.
And at home, we always want to jump in and give them the answers.
Well, you want to give them the answer. There's the rush of time. Okay. It's, we have this to get to, that to get to, that it's difficult. And you know what? It's just easier to do it yourself.
Yep.
It is, because it gets done and you're done. But with the kids, it's important that they learn. Let them learn how to carry a basket up. Do you know how much learning there is with, if they have a laundry basket filled, that coordination, how not to knock into something, how to adjust your body, all of that, how to be efficient. One of the things we work on in the clinic is efficiency rules. The idea of when you're doing a task, walk less, okay? Don't wait. Work with somebody else. Work from top to bottom, because if you don't think about it and you're cleaning off a table and you've already vacuumed the floor, you might have to vacuum the floor again if you then go to clean off the table after you vacuum the floor. So all of that takes thinking. That's the executive function again, but and inferring and thinking and next step thinking. It's all together. Get your kids cleaning the house. You think of all the things you're going to teach them.
And it helps a lot too, once they learn how to do it.
That's right. That's the other thing, is invest the time now, because then they'll be able to do it later and save you time. It's harder in the beginning, that's for sure.
I don't see any more questions. Just a very big thank you from another person who's participating in the webinar.
Okay.
Her advice was extremely helpful. I honestly, I can't say how this is the most important thing, I think, that kids can be taught, and it helps them be successful in life. And
it's back to that old saying of, you can give somebody a fish, but you're better off teaching them how to fish,
exactly.
and that's exactly what this is about. And the sad part is that in school, this active thinking and problem solving just really doesn't occur. Okay. And we really do need to facilitate it and to make sure that it happens, because that teaching of it doesn't occur, but the expectation for it is there. So it means that our kids are going to fail because nobody taught them And in fact, the opportunities were removed from them because they've had other people thinking for them. And what we need instead is to be facilitating it. And that's just not happening. So problem solving as an objective as a goal is hugely important.
It's hugely important. I agree. It looks like everyone's just typing in thank you, thank you. No other questions, Nancy.
Okay.
Thank you
That's
so
fine.
much. One other thing though, before everybody leaves, because people are still holding, how can people reach you? I know some of the information we had up on the website was about the communication clinic,
Right. And that's it. That's the way.
and they can still reach you there.
Right. That's where I am. I'm still at the communication clinic, and
Excellent.
it's on the top of all the handouts as well. So they can reach me. And truly, if somebody has a question based on this webinar, and if things that pop up, a question that pops up, send me an email. I'm good with that. Just let me know, put it in the subject question about the webinar so I don't get rid of it.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
My pleasure. Okay.
Happy New Year, everyone.
New Year.
Good, everybody. All
Bye.
right. Bye.